lunch today. It's been a struggle. It's been a struggle for many reasons. With all the best help in the world, thank you to Karen Brown and Mary, we're holding our breath, but we finally got things to work. It worked and then it didn't work, etc., etc. I went over to the other museum yesterday and today looking for some of the artifacts that we have about our topic this morning, and of course couldn't find any of them. And you know, they're there. It's just that we have hundreds of thousands of items. And they get moved around. And when I go to look for them, they're not where I last saw them 10 years ago. You know how that is? So forgive me. I do have one neat thing to show you, and the rest I will just tell you about. But today we're going to be talking about Dr. A.B. Bowen. And that's always interesting to me because we had two pretty famous doctors back in the day. Their names were both A.B. And that's just kind of funny. But today it's A.B. Bowen. The one was a spiritualist, remember? His practice of medicine was just a little different. Dr. A.B. Bowen was a very scientific doctor. But he's been interesting to me because, you know, way back in 1970s, I believe, I was living I don't know where in my former life, and I came back to Maquoketa for a time, and I had the pleasure of having Howard Clark for my neighbor. He was my parents' neighbor, and we came back to visit. I loved Howard and Elsie Clark. They were the most wonderful people. But one day when I just happened to be back, he came with, he drove in the driveway with a truck, and he came to the door, and he had tears in his eyes. And I'm like, Howard, what is wrong? And Howard at that point of his life was custodian at the Maquoketa Public Library. And he had been instructed to take 3 to 4 truckloads of books to the dump because they didn't have room. And believe me, I sympathize with the library because we don't have room either. And I understand how that is, and I'm not speaking badly of the library. It's just a fact of life. You can't keep everything. But he took me out to his truck, and that truckload was mostly old Bibles. And some of them were beautiful. And you wanted to keep each and every one. But how could you, you know? So as we were looking at the Bibles, I picked up a Bible of Dr. A.B. Bowen. And I didn't know in 1970 who Dr. A.B. Bowen was, but for some reason it just seemed important to me. And so I kept the pages from that Bible, thinking that someday when I came back here, I would find the descendants of that man. And I still have those pages, but again, they're somewhere with all of the things from my former life, and I haven't found them yet, but I bet I have them. So, to the library's credit, they donated some very nice things to the museum from Dr. A.B. Bowen. 4 scrapbooks, because he traveled around the world, and we have those there. They're not Jackson County related because they're travels to other parts of the world, but they're really interesting for us to have. And it's kind of fun to know that way before our Dr. Andrew, who traveled the world and put articles in the newspaper for us to read, way before him, Dr. A.B. Bowen had done the same thing. He wrote letters back from wherever he was. He always started out, "My dear home folks." That's how he started his articles, and then he asked how everybody was in Timber City. So, just one of the ones that I picked up and read. He was in Europe, and he was describing a ride on a steamer, the steamer Victoria, and he was going around Lake Lucerne, and they were going by the chapel of William Tell, and supposedly this is the place where he shot the apple from his son's head. And so he had, one of his articles was about that. But he tried to share all of his wonderful experiences with everybody that he could. So the picture that you see on the screen, not very, it's kind of dim with age, maybe, is from the Eastford, Connecticut Historical Society. So in 2018, when Dr. Bowen was finally installed in our Hall of Fame, that same year, in 2018, 1,118 miles away in Connecticut, a person, and I truly don't know whether it's a man or woman, probably a lady, by the name of Tony Doubleday, wrote an article for their historical society about Asa B. Bowen, Prairie Doctor. And that was in the Eastford Historical Society's newsletter. And so much of the information we have about Dr. Bowen's early life came from this article, so I'm plagiarizing here probably. And some of the old family photos that we didn't have came from them. But Asa Bowen was born on April 12th. Go on here. He was born April 12th of 1842 in Eastford, Connecticut. So this is the farm on which he was born. And it was on a rather famous road called Old Colony Road. And if you read the old history of the United States, that road comes up. He was the third of 8 children. All of these children grew up on this farm and attended the usual district schools. Their parents were Oliver and Betsy Horton Bowen. And their families, going way back, had immigrated here from Wales to Massachusetts in 1640. So they had been here quite a long time. Well, Asa decided, remember he was born in 1842, he decided to follow in the footsteps of his uncle, Dr. Benjamin Bowen, and have his career be that of a physician. So he graduated from the Mexico Academy, that always surprises me, in Mexico, New York. And it was founded in 1820, and it was one of the finer schools in the state of New York, a very prestigious school. And he graduated from there, studying medicine, and he actually taught at that school for a few semesters, and then he began to study medicine under his uncle, as they did back in the day. So, this is the USS Neptune. Okay, so the Civil War was raging on, right? And our Dr. Bowen was 22 years of age, and he answered the call for more than 600,000 troops at that time. He enlisted in the Union Navy, where he was stationed on this boat, the USS Neptune. It was a large steamer, if you can't read, if that's too small to read, a large steamer with powerful guns and a large crew. There were many men on this ship. And it was acquired by the United States Navy for service with the Union Navy during the American Civil War. She served as an armed escort vehicle for ships carrying Union gold from California around through probably the Panama Canal, I would guess, into the Caribbean Ocean. And it was here that Dr. Bowen honed his medical skills, because he was the acting assistant, he was the assistant surgeon on this ship. And his experiences there added greatly to his knowledge of medicine. And I thought an interesting side note as I was reading about this, mail was really slow getting to the ships that were at sea, right? Ships like the Neptune. And so the crew was unaware of the assassination of President Lincoln. They didn't know about it until Asa received a letter from his sister containing the tragic news. And then he responded to her letter by saying, "It will be easier for you to imagine than for me to describe the effect that the news brought by the last steamer had on our minds." And then he talked about how discouraging that was to everybody aboard that ship. So at the end of the Civil War, 1865, this ship was, I believe, decommissioned, and the crew was all discharged. So he resumed his medical career, and he graduated with honors from the Albany Medical College. And he had a brief internship in New York, and then he decided to set up practice in Maquoketa, Iowa. It was a small town similar to Eastford, Connecticut, where he was from. And so you have to think to yourself, and reading all of the history about him, whatever possessed him way out there to know about or choose Maquoketa, Iowa, right? But if you read our history, we know the answer to that. So Dr. Bowen came to Maquoketa in 1869, really, really early in our history, at the urging of Dr. Harrison Holt, who was already here, and he's a member of our Hall of Fame. So he thought about this, and knowing that the Davenport and St. Paul Railroad that we talked about a couple weeks ago was going to be completed in 1870, they could see that Maquoketa was really going to bloom, and bloom it did. Because we know from the 1878 Maquoketa, 1878 county directory, right? We know that Maquoketa at that time had an opera house, 10 grocery stores, 3 hardware stores, 2 banks, 4 clothing stores, 4 bookstores, 4 drugstores, 8 law offices, 3 shoe stores, 6 dry goods stores, 3 lumber yards, 3 livery stations, 2 cooper shops, 7 wagon and carriage shops, 3 barber shops finally, a courthouse, 5 churches, and 5 hotels. That was all here in 1878, and they certainly needed more physicians. So he was one of 6 physicians that were in the town of Maquoketa at that time.
What was the population, do you know?
The population was just about 2,000, and then as the railroad came, it just continued to grow after that. Probably to a high of maybe about 6,000 something is probably as high as we've gotten. Yeah. Okay, so here is a really neat picture of Dr. Bowen's house and office. In the 1878 directory that we're talking about lists Dr. Bowen as a physician residing between Niagara and Prospect Streets in Maquoketa. So when you're driving down West Platte Street, it's on the south side of the road, and the house is still there. The office is now right up the street on Clark Street. It's the little blue house on the west side of the street where Tony Crackey, our former curator, lived. So it was moved. So this was, first of all, it was the former house and office of his partner that we've talked about, Dr. Holt. They practiced medicine together for many years. So you see, I don't push the wrong button. So this was his office, and this was his house. And we have other newer pictures as the house was remodeled through the years. So, like we said, Dr. Holt and Dr. Bowen practiced medicine together for many, many years. One story that probably you remember was that Dr. Holt, and you know, this was country doctor medicine. Their office, we believe, was probably only open on Saturdays. The rest of the time, they were out in the country visiting people at their homes, because that's just the way it happened. But you probably remember the story of Dr. Holt. He suffered a stroke and died at the bedside of a patient in the middle of the night in a lonely farmhouse far from anywhere. In fact, he fell right over his patient. Yeah, that was pretty traumatic. So when Dr. Bowen talked about this, he characterized him as a Roman soldier dying at his post during a battle. And he also wrote an interesting story, which we all have, about Dr. Holt's life and career, and it's been repeated in the 1910 Alice History, and I believe it's in the Annals of Jackson County as well. So they were great, dear friends, but we know that Dr. Holt is the reason that Dr. Bowen actually came to Maquoketa. So there's a close-up of his office. Like Dr. Holt, Dr. Bowen gained a reputation for being a great surgeon. In fact, he was known as one of the most distinguished surgeons in all of Iowa. He was a member of the Insane Commission of Jackson County. We have a large ledger at the other building, which I didn't bring over. Pretty interesting, but he was in charge of that. He served as an examiner for over 20 different life insurance companies. In the summer of 1878, kind of the year that all of this was happening, he was appointed assistant surgeon of the Dakota and Northwestern Railroad, and the federal government also appointed him U.S. examining surgeon for pensions. So he was a very, very highly respected, highly capable, busy man. This is a schedule of fees that the Jackson County Medical Society put out. Just kind of interesting. I hope that you can read that. He was a member, of course, of the Jackson County Medical Society, as well as all the others. And they at one time decided that they had to post their fees, their chart of fees. And looking at this, you can kind of figure out that a normal delivery of a baby must have cost about $20. The notice for mileage charges, they charged by the mile to come out to your house. The charges for those who lived in the They charged for those who lived in the country. It was $1 during the daytime, 12 hours, $1 to come out to your house. It was $1.50 if they came during the 12 hours, the 12 evening hours. And of course, you know, back then they didn't just jump in the car and turn the key. They had to go to the barn and hitch up old Dolly and either saddle her or hitch her to the buggy and take off, but that's all they charged. You can see there this one bill that was given to us. Man named Elijah Streets, and he evidently passed away, but he had visits from February 13th to March 6th. He visited him at $1 each way, and his total bill for his care was $17. So it just certainly a different day, really. So in 1893, Dr. Bowen tutored E. Henry Knittel. He was a local student with aspirations of practicing medicine. He took him under his wing, and later, after Henry graduated from Iowa State University, he joined ACE's practice and practiced here for 2 years, and then went on to open his own office. Some of these things are pretty interesting. Obstetrics. Normal care, in-city normal care, $20. Consultations, $5. It's just an office visit is $1. Just pretty interesting. So sometime take a close. We have one of those on the wall at the other museum up in the medical room. So sometime take a look at some of that stuff. It's pretty interesting. Another thing that Dr. Bowen did, he was all into working with our servicemen. Having participated in the Civil War himself, you would expect that. But he belonged to the Masonic, well, not that that's military, the Masonic fraternity, and he became a 32nd degree Mason. But he was commander of the A.W. Drips post of the GAR. He was the examining person for all of the World War II people. This is the first county drafts for the Army during World War I. And some of these people I know that you have probably heard of. James Allen, Claude Buckner, Stuart Rogers, William Rankin, George Schwab, we have these of his, Calvin Sagers. So, and there's Dr. Bowen. And he was the exemption board, he represented the exemption board, and then the sheriff at the time, Sheriff McCarthy, and the auditor Sagers. But he just spent a great deal of his time doing things like that. So he was a very busy man. He was always very interested in politics. He was a lifelong Republican, and he had remembered casting his first vote for Abraham Lincoln. In 1908, kind of against his will, he was pressed to run for the Iowa Senate seat, 1908. Perhaps this was the only defeat in his long list of accomplishments through the years, but in an overwhelmingly Democratic area, he received 2,351 votes, and his opponent was the Democratic incumbent, L.B. Parshall, and he received 2,491 votes. So in this Democratic stronghold, Dr. A.B. Bowen lost by only 146 votes, which was really a very close race and very special. Dr. Bowen, outside of medicine, had a lot of other loves, hobbies, ambitions, talents. And here we see him, he always had dogs. He loved his dogs and loved to have photographs taken. Most of the photographs you see of him are with one of his dogs. And he's also known for keeping deer in his backyard during the winters, his backyard on West Platte Street. He was especially known for his love of good literature, and he found special pleasure in reading and studying the classics. And Dr. Bowen, we're told, had almost a photographic memory, and he could easily, from memory, quote long passages from his favorite works. He was also, and probably because of that, he was a master orator, and he was always being asked to give talks and programs. And he gave many inspirational and delightful programs all around the area. But having photographic memory would be a big help with all of that, because he always had something he could pull up to say to every occasion. But he was just well known. He was a very, very brilliant man. So this is one of the first pictures, we believe, of Dr. Bowen's home that had belonged to Dr. Holt first. He was married on May 4th, 1874 to Minnie Clark, who was born in Maquoketa in 1856. She was an only child. Is she part of your Clarks, Barbara, do you know? Not. Okay. I was going to write down her parents' names and I didn't. Dr. Bowen and Minnie had 6 children. They were Frances, Hattie, Cora, Julia, Bruce, and Jessie. And Cora, the second daughter, died in 1882 at 4 years old. I did not find the reason for that, but Julia, who was born in 1887, died of scarlet fever. It must have been really heart-wrenching for a doctor to have a child in his family that is so ill and he was not able to save them. That must have been particularly hard. But of the 6 children, only Frances and her brother Jesse grew to maturity. Minnie, I got another picture of the house. This is more what the house looks like today on West Platte Street. Minnie was a public school teacher before her marriage, and she was not the kind of person to be content to stay home. So Minnie, because she had a natural music talent, started taking music lessons. I know she went to Clinton to take music lessons, and she eventually became the best-known instrumental music teacher in Jackson County. Do you remember? And she did that for 24 years. So she was quite a wonderful lady in her own right. Her passion was the Maquoketa Library, and she's credited with the fact that it did become a reality. After it was built, she organized an elegant pageant to raise money to buy the books, and later donated the money to replace the heating plant when they needed new heat system. She was a member of the Women's Relief Corps and the DAR, and she was also one of those very special ladies who helped to make it possible for the Maquoketa Caves to become an Iowa State Park. And after the dedication of that as a state park, she entertained the governor and all of the state officials and members of the Conservation Corps in her home. So she was just quite an accomplished woman in her own right. Come on. Okay, so we all know about the Outlook Club, and this is a party that they held at one time, an old photo, and it does show Mrs. Bowen, who was a 45-year member, and Mrs. Bowen is the one with the flag right here. And oh, did I say flag? I'm sorry, fan. Sorry, I have flags on my brain. And I believe this is her daughter, Frances, and this is Sarah Johnson's great-grandmother, Nan Harrison. Grandmother, Nan Harrison, and she's seated on the floor. So she was quite a lady, and they loved to entertain. And they had many functions at their house with big meals and important people and that sort of thing. That's what they enjoyed. So in 1919, on the 50th anniversary of his profession, 50 guests, because it was the 50th anniversary, 50 guests were invited to pay tribute to the doctor. And again, the party was at the Bowen home, and a cafeteria banquet was served. The program was made up of prominent members of the community, and there were several readings by Inez Banghart and a solo by Louise Ellis, who we talk about from time to time. And all this information came from an old scrapbook that Al and Margaret Ale donated to the Historical Society. Talks about many of Dr. Bowen's impressive accomplishments. And of course there's always a lot of flowery language at the time, but it points out some pretty impressive statistics. And one of the things that it said was that his record, his record from his medical office showed that he had delivered over 1,400 babies. He had 400 cases of fractures and dislocations, over 100 appendectomies, untold hysterectomies, gallstone cases, etc. And to me, the fun thing was, it said, most of which were performed in no more convenient place than at the ordinary farmhouse kitchen table. That's where most of this happened, because most of that time there was no hospital. So that's why they were always, not in their office, they were always out and about. It is noted by the state that while in practice, he performed over 400 surgeries, which was more than any doctor in the state at that time. The Bowens, like I said, loved to entertain. They hosted many affairs at their beautiful home on West Platte Street, but they loved to travel as well. And they visited friends, and they visited relatives, and they were always out and about around the whole United States. They took trips to California. They went on at least 2 European adventures that we know of. And when they did this, oftentimes they took friends and family with them. They were very, very generous. And I know that one time when they went to Europe, one of his brothers was invited to go along. In 1924, they celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. So this is a picture that again came to us from Connecticut, from Eastford, Connecticut. This is a picture of Asa and 2 of his brothers. He, like I said, never forgot his roots. They were all, the whole town is so aware of him, even now. And he just never forgot his roots. He visited family and friends in Eastford frequently. As I said, took some members on world trips. And his brother, Judge Andrew Bowen, Andrew is there. So, this is Andrew, right? Andrew was the judge.
Yep.
And Andrew Bowen wrote a book that was dedicated to his brother. So they were a close family, and even though he moved away and spent most of his time in Iowa, which then was a long way away, a lot of memories still exist there. And I just thought that this also came to us from the other Historical Society snippets written by his brother, Aaron Bowen, and you can see that. He loved those chestnuts from back east. And then the funniest one I thought was the last one. Can you read that? Everybody read that? Okay. Received a letter from Dr. A.B. Bowen of Iowa lately, requesting me to send some more of those mammoth chestnuts from the old home. He wrote that in 1899. Our brother, this is a different snippet, our brother A.B. Bowen of Maquoketa lately made his annual visit east and returned to his many patients in the Big West in 1916. And then the most fun one is the last one. He said, just received a letter from Dr. A.B. Bowen of Iowa. The doctor sends lots of valuable Christmas presents to his friends in the East. Proves the doctor does not wish to pay too much inheritance tax. The doctor is less than 80 years young, like the late Andrew Carnegie, and likes to make others happy with his strenuous accumulations. And that was written in December of 1919 also. So he was just, he never forgot his roots and the people that he loved back home. Ta-da! Okay, so we had some correspondence back in 1983 with the Historical Society there. They were looking for information about A.B. Bowen. We were looking for information from them. And so quite a few things happened. They told us that they had received 3 photographs that were found in an old house there in which Dr. Bowen's brother had once lived. And the photos were of the Barnes electrical power plant and the Klondike Dam where they generated energy. So this is the inside of the Barnes Electric Power Company. and this is the Klondike Dam. And on the back of each was a leaf from Dr. Bowen's prescription pad with the notation, Barnes Electric Power Plant, Dr. Bowen President. That was on the back of each one. Dr. Bowen was also president of the Farmers Trust and Savings Bank, and he was vice president of the First National Bank. So at that time, the First National Bank would have been upstairs in the Pierce Mitchell building, right, Don? Because the other one would not have been built yet. Okay, so that's where he would have been vice president of. So we have some other artifacts that have been given to us over the years that are really, really very interesting. Tried to bring them over to show them to you, but I couldn't find them this morning because things get rearranged and reorganized and put away, and it's a good thing. So I'm sure they're there, and next week I will find them. I'm sure when it's too late. One of the things was an old medical catalog that was found in a house on Quarry Street that Dr. Bowen is said to have owned at one time, and that was brought in not really too long ago. Just very, very interesting, and I just wanted to put that out for you to look at, but I probably remember it being blue and it was black, or something like that. I just couldn't find it. But another thing that we received from Marge de Geer, sorry, she called it a shot glass, and I did bring that over. And as you can see, it has a missing piece. It had a missing piece when we got it, but we don't care. We love it anyway. So she called it a shot glass. On the front it says Dr. Bowen, 1894. And it's been glued together, and it's a little missing, but it's very special. So Marcella Henneke, who helps us out so much, back when it came in, did some research, and found out that it is a toothpick holder. So we have Dr. Bowen's toothpick holder, and it's very precious to us. So we're very happy to have it. We had a program a few years ago about Dr. Calkins and Dr. Bowen being very, very dear friends. And Dr. Calkins is the man from Wyoming that has the Calkins house that's still there, and it's wonderful. It is very wonderful. So we went there, we took a tour, and I knew that some of his things were there. I was absolutely amazed at how many of Dr. Bowen's artifacts are in the Calkin house. And I bet Lana knows more than anybody what's in that house. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that as you go up the big staircase to the upstairs, right on the first landing of the staircase, there's a huge, a grandfather clock. And there might be that too, a grandfather clock that had belonged to Dr. Bowen and been in his house. Many, many of his medical books are there. Just many different artifacts of his are there. And I thought, isn't that wonderful that they're there and they're so well preserved and that so many people are getting to see them. And I just assumed that they were there because they were such good friends. The whole families were such good friends. But now I know that both Dr. and Mrs. Calkins both passed away before the Bowens. And so then you have to wonder, why did those things go there? And maybe we never will know the answer to that, but I think that the good thing is that they're there, and anybody who wants to see them can go there and enjoy them. But they were very dear friends. So our dear Dr. Bowen died. Dr. Bowen died April 16th of 1925. He died in Maquoketa, and he's buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. He was 83 years old, and he had a wonderful, productive life. It's unusual that Minnie Bowen outlived not only her husband, but all 6 of her children. I just think that would be so sad. She outlived all 6 of her children. 4 of them evidently died when they were very young. Jesse Bowen, who became a doctor like his father, and he carried on his father's practice for 3.5 years after Dr. Bowen's death. He was a fine member of the community. Everybody respected him, just a wonderful man. And then he shocked the city by taking his own life in their office. So all of her children were gone before her. what heartache that must have brought to her. So Minnie, who was so very capable and did so much in her own right, died at her home in 1939 at the age of 83. So they both died at the age of 83. So I just find them to be just an exemplary couple. And as I went back through the research, I kept seeing little notes in my handwriting that said, Dr. Bowen needs to be in our Hall of Fame. Why isn't Dr. Bowen in our Hall of Fame? Dr. Bowen and Mrs. Bowen need to be in our Hall of Fame together. And of course that didn't happen. Dr. Bowen wasn't put into our Hall of Fame until 2018, which was way after many of the other doctors, some who did a lot less maybe. But he wasn't put in until 2018. And then, I don't know what happened to Minnie, but she missed out. So maybe someday her turn will come, but she did wonderful things. So just another example of some of the wonderful, wonderful people that came to Jackson County back in the day, that suffered hardships, some of them that we can't even imagine, but worked so hard and did so much to make this a better place for all of us. And that's what our Hall of Fame is about, and why we like to, from time to time, talk about these people so we never forget them. So that is Brown Bag Lunch for today. Thank you.